Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to share with you a review of the new Urban Decay Game of Thrones palette, and then I'm also going to be sharing comparisons to the Born to Run palette and to show you guys some side-by-side swatches, a tutorial with this look using the Game of Thrones palette, and everything you need to know about it. So if you guys want to know my thoughts about the new Game of Thrones Urban Decay palette, then just keep on watching. Alright, so the new Game of Thrones palette retails for $65, and it's going to be available on the Urban Decay website on April 14th, available online at Ulta April 29th, and then in stores at Ulta on May 2nd. So this is what the palette looks like. It's definitely made for collectors or just somebody who's a fan of Game of Thrones. I've actually never seen it in my life. So I'm just going to be looking at it from the makeup perspective, but I would definitely love to know your thoughts if you are a fan of the show. But this is what the packaging looks like, and it comes inside a box that looks like this. It has all the shades on the back as well. So it is a little bit pricier because of the packaging for sure. So inside you have a mirror, and then in here it has the actual throne. So it's definitely more of a collector's item for sure. It's definitely made for the fans. And then in here you can pull out the eyeshadow palette, and it comes out completely, and it's super, super thin. However, the packaging does annoy me a little bit. Actually, it annoys me quite a bit because I feel like they could have definitely made this palette so that you can just remove this and keep it outside of the box forever and travel without this, or just have this in your collection without having to like do this every time. I actually put the Born to Run palette in here just to see if it fits, and it definitely, well, it's a little bit big, but it definitely fits. So they can definitely do something similar. I wish they did something similar with this palette where it did have a cover to it. So just keep that in mind, that it's not the most practical packaging. It's definitely designed for Game of Thrones fans, and not so much just like a palette to take on the go. So once we get into the actual eyeshadow palette, I actually really like everything in this palette. Like, I like every single shade. This is basically my color scheme, and the first thing that I thought when I saw this palette was that it really reminded me of the color scheme of the Born to Run palette that came out from Urban Decay last summer. So this palette is $49 and it has 21 shades, and then in here we have 20 shades for $65. It's a little pricier because of the packaging, but you actually do get a bit more product in here compared to Born to Run. In this palette we get 19.28 grams, and then in here we get 16.8, in case you're like overly concerned about the sizing. But I was curious to see if you actually get more product in here, or if it was just like a bigger palette. So I'm actually glad that we do get a little bit more product for $16 more in this palette. But before we get into some more swatch comparisons, because I'm excited to show you guys those, I want to go ahead and show you swatches of just this palette. So we do have 20 shades in here. We only have 4 matte shades and then 16 shimmer shades. The mattes are basically this black that has a little bit of a shimmer to it, or a little bit of a glitter, but it is a matte shade. This pinky shade, this more reddish tone, and then a matte warm brown. Everything else is shimmer, and all of these shimmers up here are more like true shimmers, and then down here we have all of the like foiled shadows. So I'm gonna go ahead and insert swatches of these 16 shades in the top 2 rows of all the mattes and the shimmers. These shimmers really do stand out, and the mattes blend out so gorgeous. And then let me show you guys the foiled shades, because these are all very pretty, and they are a little bit different of a formula because they're a bit chunkier. So those are all 4 of the foiled shades, which are kind of like either lid toppers or just like a very foiled shade if you just want to pack it on to the lid. Especially this shade Winterfell. This one is super beautiful. It's so pigmented. And then let me just swatch a couple of the shimmers, like live swatch them for you guys, because you will see that they are so, like this shade I have on my lid right now. These are very creamy shades as well. They swatch really nicely too. And that's kind of like the consistent formula. With all the other shimmers in the palette, they're very smooth, not chunky, not glittery. And then those 4 foils are a little bit chunkier, more like lid toppers or just like very foiled shades. All right, so getting into the shade similarities between Born to Run and the Game of Thrones palette. And honestly, when I first saw just pictures of this palette, I was really reminded of Born to Run, but I thought maybe I'm being kind of picky, and once I actually swatched it, there's not gonna be a lot of similarities, but I just found like they were pretty similar. Just looking at both of them, both have like warm brown transition shades and a lot of very similar pops of colors like purples, blues, greens, and then some like neutrally gold shades. So then swatching both palettes, there's actually a lot of similarities. There are 8 similarities between both palettes that are almost identical. And the Game of Thrones palette has 20 shades. Born to Run has 21. So it's almost half of both palettes are practically identical, and then the shades that are different, it's not like anything that's so out there. Like I'm looking at the rest of the colors and it's just like a more cool tone purple versus more of a warm tone purple, a darker gold, a more yellowy gold. So it's like still in that same color scheme of the other shades, even though they aren't like pretty close matches to each other. All right, so those are all of the comparisons between both palettes. Let's get into the tutorial so you guys can see how the Game of Thrones palette performs and how I did my makeup using the palette today. All right, so I want to play with some of the purpley tones. I'm going to start off with some of the warmer transition shades. I'm going to go in with this shade Nymeria, more of like a warm brown. I love warm browns and purples together. The mattes in here, super pigmented, so blending can happen like super quickly. And to be honest, I've actually never ever seen Game of Thrones, so I'm over here on my phone Googling pronunciations of some of the names. So in case you guys are fans, I hope I do not pronounce anything wrong, but that's what I'm gonna be doing in between picking up pretty much all of the shades because they're all references to the show. Next up, I'm adding in a bit of this reddish shade Lannister Red. I'm just using a dense flat brush to kind of pack that on my outer corner. These mattes are really pigmented. Kind of reminds me of like Anastasia, where you get a lot of pigmentation right off the bat. They blend out really easily as well, and I haven't noticed really any fallout with any of the shades that I've used. All right, so I built that up mostly in my outer crease, and I'm gonna go in with this shade Stormborn, this purpley shade all over the lid. I did apply, or I did wet my brush, but I do find that these shimmers are very pigmented. There's actually like all of these shades over here are more of like foiled shadows, and then the rest of the shades in the like the main part of the palette are shimmers. So you can definitely see like a difference in texture between those. Then I'm going to take this shade Werewood Leaves, this like purpley tone. It's kind of shimmery, and I'm just using a packing brush. This is an E17 from Morphe. I absolutely love this brush, this one, and I have like one more brush that's very similar to this, is what I normally do for my outer corner to pack on color and then just kind of diffuse it upwards into my crease. I feel like I did my eye makeup. I have to clean that up a little bit, but I basically did my eye makeup in like 3 minutes because all of these shadows are really pigmented and really easy to blend out, that you don't need to spend too much time because you're gonna get a lot of color payoff right away. So I just threw on this Urban Decay eyeliner. This is in the shade Love Drunk. This is like one of my favorite purple eyeliners. It's like one of the 2 purple eyeliners that I own, but I love this one because it's kind of shimmery. And then I'm just gonna use like mostly the matte shades on my lower lash line. I'm just gonna use this brown, and then I think also the Werewolf Leaves, the purpley shimmer on my lower lash line a little bit too. So I also just added mascara and basically my eyes are done. I am gonna throw on lashes in a minute, but I also want to use the shade Hard Home. This is a foiled shadow and it's almost like a shadow topper. Like it's more of a kind of chunky shade. The shade is really pretty. But I'm going to add this to my inner corner just with like a little pencil brush, just to give it a little bit of a reflective look. All right, so my eyes are basically done. Super quick, super easy. I also have been playing with different eye looks with like the blue and the green shades in here. And usually those kind of colorful looks take me a little bit longer than like something very neutral, but it basically takes the same amount of time because all the shades are very pigmented and blendable and like really pop and stand out on the eyes. So really, really easy palette to use if you want something colorful that really stands out. But that's gonna be everything for this eye look. I am gonna put on some lashes and then I'll give you guys all my final thoughts. All right guys, so this is the completed look with the palette. Super easy to use, a really awesome formula. I just reviewed recently the Naked Reloaded palette like a month ago. I think this formula is so much better than that one. I felt like that formula is more like subtle, more, yeah, that's the best word I would have to use for it. It's not eyeshadows that really stand out. They're more like beginner friendly, day-to-day eyeshadows that I wear when I'm wearing like very minimal makeup. I actually wear that palette a lot, but I can never get an intense look like this with the neutral shades in that palette. Even the neutral shades in this palette, I can get a very intense look, like especially with this shade that I really want to wear so badly. But all of these neutrals still look amazing if you want us to stick with the neutral tones, and the colorful shades are stunning in here as well. I want to play with these two right here because I never really do like a cool tone blue shade, but I love this shade. I did an eye look with this that should be on my Instagram in the next day or two. So gorgeous. I love how pigmented these colorful shades are because you don't have to make them work, like one swipe and you're good to go. So absolutely love the formula of this palette. The biggest thing I don't like is the packaging, but that's as somebody who has never seen Game of Thrones. I think if you are a fan, you might actually really like the packaging. You might want to hang on to it as like a collector's item. So it's definitely just all personal preference, but I think that even if this palette was a little bit more expensive, like even 70, maybe $75, it would be more worth it to have a palette that you can pull out and it did have a cover to it that you could just take on the go, because of course I can't just like put this in a suitcase. Not that I'm ever traveling, like I never really leave this room. So I don't know what I'm worried about, but it is kind of inconvenient just in my own makeup collection to have something so bulky and like having to like remove it. If I only have like 10 minutes to do my makeup, I don't have like a minute to like fidget with a palette. So I don't use palettes sometimes because they are bulkier or the packaging is kind of like inconvenience to just like grab out of my drawer. So that's something to keep in mind if that's something that stops you from using a palette. But in terms of the shades, the quality, the formula, I'm so impressed. Sometimes when there's palettes like this that are collector's items or like more, I don't want to say gimmicky, but attached to another name or like a celebrity or something that is a big deal, sometimes the quality is a little bit less, but this is amazing. Like the quality, I have no complaints whatsoever. If you are a Game of Thrones fan and you want this palette, I think you will absolutely love it. If you're not a Game of Thrones fan, I think that you would still really enjoy this palette. You might be a little annoyed with the packaging, but the palette's actually awesome. But also, if you have the Born to Run palette, it's a very similar color scheme, way more convenient. I travel with this palette, so when I do travel once a year, I take this palette with me. Born to Run is definitely a way more convenient packaging for sure. So if you want to look into that palette, if you like the color scheme of Game of Thrones but you don't think that you'll use it for practicality reasons, definitely check out Born to Run because I think that the qualities are very similar. I just do like the shade selections in here as well. I feel like there's more unique shades that I tend to gravitate towards in this palette versus Born to Run. It does have those shades as well, but it also has a lot of neutral shades that I have in other palettes, whereas this palette has more unique shades that I don't necessarily have, like 12 in my collection. So that's kind of my overall thoughts on both. If you guys are fans of Game of Thrones, let me know if that made you excited about this palette, or if like the palette like did the show justice for you, if that makes sense. Like, was this a letdown if you are a fan, or were you really excited about it? Because I'm really not familiar with the show at all, so I'd love to know your thoughts about that. But that's gonna be everything for today's video. I hope it was helpful for you guys. Let me know if you plan on purchasing this palette or any part of the collection in the comments down below. And if you guys like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And I'll talk to you guys soon in my next video. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.